Hello, James Moffat here. Please go to parentingadultchildren.org website and sign up for a free membership and leave a review for this episode. If you have any requests for future topics, send me an email at talkpac@proton.me. That's talkpac@proton.me. Please share this podcast with your friends and family. Now for today's guest interview.
Welcome to the podcast ABCs of Parenting Adult Children. Please join us as we discuss parenting adult children and the unique struggles that it comes along with.
Hello, and thank you for listening to our podcast. Please subscribe and follow this podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Please take the time to leave a review where you listen to podcasts or on our website at parentingadultchildren.org. Our Instagram channel is parentingadultchildren125. Video episodes are uploaded at rumble.com and my YouTube channel. Please subscribe and follow those channels for future updates. I release new episodes every Friday at 8 a.m. Thank you for listening, and now to our featured episode. Hello and welcome to ABC's of Parenting Adult Children podcast. My name is James Moffat, and I'll be your host. Today we have a guest speaker, Kent Darcie. Kent, how are you?
I'm doing great. Good to be with you.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Do me a favor and introduce yourself to the listening audience, please.
Sure. I'm Kent Darcie. I am the founder of Adults with Divorced Parents Ministries. I'm also a licensed professional counselor, been married for 41 years to my high school sweetheart, and we have 3 adult kids.
Oh, wow. Katie and I have been married for 34 years, and we raised 4 children. They're all grown and gone.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, they're never totally gone, but they live on their own anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So 41 years, that's pretty amazing.
We're very thankful. It's been, in fact, actually, we were together 6 years prior to that. We met in 12th grade.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
So y'all were high school sweethearts.
Well, yeah, for a year.
Not quite high school. Yeah, yeah.
Well, senior year in high school, actually, we met. And after that, she went away to college, so we were away for 2.5 years and, all that sort of craziness. And then we decided we were an us, and we've been going at it for a lot of years.
I was at our Publix pharmacy in Goose Creek where we live the other day. It's probably been a month. I say the other day. And I saw this old couple sitting together, and you could tell they were in their 70s or 80s, And so I was checking out, and I went over and stood in front of them. And I said, "Can I ask you a question?" And they're like, "Sure." I said, "How long have y'all been married?" And they said, 66 years. And I was like, wow. I said, "I've heard of 50, I've heard of 55, but never 66 years. I said, what's the magic there? How did y'all stay together that long?" And the guy looked at his wife, and she said, "We were in the military for 30 of those years, and so we weren't really around each other for the first half of our marriage." And then we all got a chuckle out of that. Absence makes the heart grow fonder, I guess.
I guess. There you go.
Yeah. So I'm going to read something from your bio, I guess. It says we can engage you in a conversation focused on the nuanced effects of parental divorce on adult children and the unresolved emotions influencing relationships and mental well-being. You could address denial and overcoming challenges as crucial talking points for your audience of parents seeking deeper understanding. So I wanted for you to be on our show because I know that there are probably single parents listening to this podcast, or there's parents that are either contemplating divorce, or they're separated, or they're in process of getting the divorce and all of the complications and complexities that surround all of that. I would like to say or hope that nobody is going through that, but I went through that personally. So I know that there's probably people listening to this podcast that could use your expertise.
Well, it's interesting. ABC is a parenting adults. Some of those adults have divorced parents, as you mentioned. But the first thing I want to say is, and this is really important, is that my ministry, we are not about bashing divorced people. We don't dishonor parents. We're not, if you're divorced and you're listening, I'm not going to talk about the right or wrong reasons for divorce or theology of divorce or any of that sort of stuff. Basically, my position is that the divorce happened. What are the possible impacts on the kids or adult kids? And how do we deal with those impacts? If you're out there and you're listening and you're divorced or whatever, you can relax, because this is absolutely not going to be a bashing session. I'm a person of faith, and the Bible says we are to honor our father and our mother. And I found that I was more able to do that after I worked through a lot of this stuff because my parents divorced when I was 13.
I got you. My parents, they didn't have the most loving relationship. My my sister and I were adopted in Germany by a military family, mom and dad, and they brought us to America. And I am absolutely thrilled that they did that for us because we were provided probably a much better level of living than we would have experienced had we stayed in that orphanage. And so they provided, room and board, a roof over our head, food, school clothes, school books, all of the physical necessities that children need, and security. But they didn't know how to demonstrate love to their children. And my dad, who was a drill instructor for 26 years in the Army, he self-medicated with alcohol, and he had a temper. And so I have memories of some heated arguments between him and my mother. I don't think he ever put his hands on her, but there was a lot of yelling and screaming going on. And they actually talked about divorce at one point. I remember my dad coming into my bedroom and asking me, he said, "Hey, we're separating and we're getting a divorce. Who do you want to live with?" And I was like, "I don't want to live with you, dude. I'll live with mom because she's not going to beat me every day like you do." I didn't say that. I didn't know what to say. I was just kind of looking at him going, "Jesus, what answer am I supposed to give here? Because I don't want to make anybody mad, And
about how old were you when that happened?
I was probably 8, 9, 10 years old, something like that.
9, 10 years old. Yeah. I've heard that before.
Range.
Yeah. And sometimes it's the judge that asks that question.
Yeah.
And that's, wow.
And they managed to keep it together. I think family got to, his brothers. He was raised in Quinlan, Texas, and he had several brothers and sisters. And I think they did a somewhat of an intervention with him and got involved and helped him to realize the error of his way. And so I would say things kind of evened out, and they did not get separated or divorced. And so at that time in my life, I really didn't know how to process all of that or what it would have looked like had that really happened, or I don't know. So it relationships and marriages are complicated.
Yes,
can be complicated, and sometimes marriage doesn't work. I mean, I'm on my second marriage. My first marriage lasted all of 2 years.
Okay,
and we were very young, and in retrospect, we should have never gotten married. I have a 38-year-old son that came from that marriage, but I'm very, very familiar with what all of that entails. It can be very ugly.
Yeah, actually, because I've been doing this for 20 years, and I deal with the adults who have divorced parents, by its very nature, you're dealing with, and personally, I know people and my parents that have gone through divorce, and it is, well, the research shows it's the second highest emotional impact of any relationship from a negative standpoint is divorce, first being the death of a spouse. So it is, another reason we don't beat up on divorced people is because it is tremendously challenging and traumatic and very, very difficult time, and causes a number of issues and layers for the divorced parents. So yeah, I mean, it can be really, really challenging.
I think, I'm a boomer, child of the 70s and 80s. And I think back then, divorce, like many other social issues, was there was kind of a stigma attached to it, and people didn't really come out of the closet or talk to it or admit it or anything, So I think we knew about divorce, but we didn't really know people in our family circle or whatever that were actually getting divorced or got a divorce or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think now I think there are. I may be wrong, but I'm thinking, in 2025 or, late 1990s up until now, there were probably more resources and it was more acceptable for that to happen, in marriages.
Absolutely. A lot more resources. Yeah. Yeah. But it also, the reasons for divorces has changed through the years. For many years, the number one reason for divorces was infidelity, that there was a breach in a marriage. But that stopped, I would say, 10 or 12 years ago now, where the number one issue now is we're just not getting our needs met. We're not happy. So we're walking away. It used to be
money.
Yeah, well, that was on the list.
One of the reasons used to be money. It was pretty high on the list, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. But infidelity was one for years and years and years and years. But
Yep.
now I'm just not getting my needs met, so I'm moving on.
Yeah, and I think that the marriage relationship, if you're a person of faith like we are, you'll laugh when I tell you this, but my wife and I have a coffin clause.
Okay.
In other words, you're not getting out of the relationship unless you're dead, right? That's basically our commitment. And I'm not saying that we're threatening to kill one another if it doesn't work out. I'm just saying that, we recognize, especially my wife realized I came from a failed relationship. She married me anyway, and she stole my heart and ran off with it. I have no clue, her and her girlfriends at First Baptist Church in Houston did with my heart, but somehow it got stolen, and I fell in love again, and so I just lost my train of thought. I don't even know what I was talking about.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about the impact, and it's a wonderful thing. And like, as I said at the onset, we're going to talk about some stuff that is real, but we are not going to do it in a way that's going to dishonor people that went through, for many, the most traumatic thing that's going to happen in their lives, because very often one was not in favor of it. So it was kind of forced on them. That having been said, because they are going through the most emotionally trying event of their life, there isn't always as much emotional energy for the kids. There also is, and I was also went through divorce. My parents divorced when in 73. So it is ironic because at the time, I didn't know anybody whose parents were divorced, like you were saying. But as I look back, I can see people that I know they had divorced parents. And the irony of it is that the numbers show that we were just past the peak of divorces at that time. There were a lot of divorces going on at that time. It just wasn't, like you said, you just didn't hear about it. It was kind of behind the shadows. You just didn't know about it, but it was going on.
Yeah, I remember what I was going to say. I was going to say that probably in the 50s, 60s, or whatever, people really took marriage seriously. It was a holy matrimony. It was a marriage contract, and people didn't have a fly-by-night lackadaisical attitude that we see today, where people are like, okay, yeah, we'll get married, or a lot of people don't even want to get married. They just live together, and we don't want to sign a contract. We don't need a marriage license, blah, blah, blah. And because at the first sign of trouble, we can just pack up our crap and go somewhere else and go do something else. Go find somebody else that's maybe more compatible with us. So I think 30 or 40 years ago, there was a little more forethought and, courtship and maybe even pastoral counseling. There was a thought process that was put into, actually getting married to somebody and being committed to them. And I don't know where
death do you part.
Yeah. And I don't know where that flew out the window, but there was, I think with the advent of social media and dating apps and, Facebook and TikTok and, MySpace and all those different social media apps where people could cheat on their spouses, with somebody that they'd meet online or whatever. At some point, the seriousness the sanctity of the marriage relationship kind of flew out the window, which is kind of sad.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey there, James here, James Moffitt. I wanted to let you know about our current sponsors. These people sponsor the podcast financially and help to underwrite the cost of producing this podcast. And I want to say thank you to them. So Michael Evan Blair is with whenindoubt.spinitout.com. Richard Jones is with secondstarts.com. Addiction Recovery Program. Jonathan Nall, he's the author of Final Approach or finalapproach.com. Kenny Dupar, author of Scoundrels in Iraq. Scott Yamamura, author of Financial Epiphany. Mary Toko is a vocal advocate for vaccine education and parental rights. Andrew Ryan Profashi is a cult and cancer survivor and the author of The War on Love. Melissa Crook is a podcast guest, and she is the insightful and compassionate host of the Feel, that's F.E.E.L. podcast. All right. Thank you for listening to this. And now back to your feature presentation.
Well, and I think part of that is what we're talking about today. What happens when our parents divorce? How does it impact us? How does it impact how we think? How does it impact how we feel? What impact does it have on our relationships? We know the research shows that if somebody from an intact family marries somebody from a divorced family, that the odds of the marriage failing increases 50%. We also know the research shows that if two people from divorced families marry, that the odds of the marriage failing compared to two people from an intact home, the odds of the marriage failing is over 200% higher. So just by its very nature, and when you look at some of the issues that affects adults with divorced parents, it's kind of interesting because they are the exact things that undermine relationships, strong relationships. And you also mentioned, living together, which is, rampant. It's the highest levels we've ever seen today. But one of the reasons people live together is because they're afraid of divorce. They're afraid that it isn't going to work out. They don't have the faith that they can even do it. So I'm not going to take the chance on marrying and then having it fall apart. I'm going to just live together. And in reality, and that's not a conversation we're going to have time for today, but cohabitation, I teach on quite a bit. Because when you're dealing with adults with divorced parents, they're afraid of divorce, which is one of the big things. They're not afraid. They're afraid their marriage won't work, and we'll just live together because it's safer. And in reality, the opposite is true. It is not as secure. All the things that you're looking for in that relationship really aren't there. And as a result, what happens is that we don't become who we really can be because we are kind of shortcutting commitment. We're shortcutting that deep relationship that we want. I particularly, whenever I teach about living together, I always speak to the women because they're usually the big losers in this. The guys get everything they want. They get the physical intimacy. They have somebody that cleans the house. And the research is fascinating on that. How even when they live together, she still does all the work and everything. Everything he wants, he's got. So why would he marry? But she, and even when we approach living together today, they call it either sliding or intentionality. And basically what sliding is the rent needs to be due. Do I really want to do my lease? Well, it'll be cheaper financially. We should just live together. That's sliding. And what happens is that the research shows that in many cases, the woman will lose 5, 6, 8 of her dateable years, say from roughly 20 to 28 or 22 to 30, those dateable years when you're in college or your new job or whatever, and you lose those years because you finally dawns on you at 28, 5, 6, 7 years, this guy is not going to marry. And you come to a decision, what am I going to do? And at that point, those years are gone. So the research shows that really living together doesn't accomplish the goals that today's hype would say it does.
Right. I think some people live together and they treat it like a trial period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're like when you're courting and you're dating, you've always got your best foot forward. You're always,
Mm-hmm.
dressing nicely.
Mm-hmm.
You're always not belching or farting in public. And,
Mm-hmm.
you're on your best behavior, right?
Yeah.
And then, but when people live together and they cohabitate 24/7, then that's when the real you comes out, and all the irritating habits and embarrassing mannerisms and, whatever, and people are, using, like I said, using that as a trial period to decide, well, are we really compatible? We fell in love at one point. And there's some attraction there. There's some chemistry. We're thinking about spending the rest of our lives together, but let's do a compatibility test and see if we're really going to be able to make it.
Right. And on the surface, that makes sense.
Sure.
But in reality, none of the research supports that. It's kind of fascinating.
I got you.
I mean, on the census, it makes sense. Of course, we'll do a trial period. But have you, today we have all those reality programs where they have the camera, the camera there and everybody's acting real. When was the last time you were somewhere and a camera showed up and everybody acted real? I mean, let's face it. I mean, and when you put that into a living relationship, one of the things that happens is that we aren't real. But again, particularly with the ladies, because the guys enter the relationship we'll see what's going on. The lady is usually entering the relationship as a tool for marriage. So as a result, when we live together, one of the scriptures says is iron sharpens iron. We get stronger. Is she going to push if she's afraid he can just leave? Is she going to say those things that wives will say if she runs the risk of leaving? And we are also in a world right now where it's highly likely there's a kid involved. She already has a kid. So is she going to risk saying what really needs to be said, a healthy thing, putting in boundaries, all those things that marriage counselors say we need to do? Is she going to do that if the risk factor is that he could leave? So in reality, it isn't as safe. And from the male standpoint, again, being a person of faith, are we really going to be the person that God is calling us to be if we're never challenged? if we never are, that iron sharpens iron. And, the research shows that married men live longer. Married men of faith really live longer. And a lot of that is because guess who drags you to the hospital or makes you go to see the doctor or all that sort of stuff? It's the woman that does it. Well, if she's not willing to push, is she going to do that? So again, the whole thing that sounds good on the surface, there's a number of reasons why in reality and in practice, it just doesn't work.
Would you say that women are more in tune with or geared towards wanting a commitment in a relationship?
Absolutely.
Because they're looking for security.
Yes.
Looking for security. They're looking for somebody that's going to treat them and their child right.
Absolutely. And the other thing you won't hear out there, because we're just in a culture that we want to do whatever we want, is that, you shouldn't stay with a husband, if he's not treating you right and he's abusing you and all this sort of stuff, which absolutely. I mean, if there's physical abuse, emotional, I'm absolutely, there's a biblical separation that we look towards reconciliation. Absolutely. I never teach to stay in harm's way. However, a lot of cases, that's not the case. It's not about that. So we want to make sure that we're really careful. The point I was making is that child, particularly the girls, are far more likely to be in danger with the cohabitation relationship than in the marriage relationship because you don't have blood. When stepbrothers, stepsisters come on the scene, there's no blood there. So all those issues that we're concerned about and everybody's saying, oh, don't stay in the marriage because of this, it's far more likely, the research shows it's far more likely to happen in these cohabitating relationships. So they're not safe. And that security that she's looking for, she's never really going to get until she's with somebody who's willing to make that commitment, or as Beyonce would say, puts a ring on it.
Right.
In fact, it's kind of interesting. I'm assuming we can say this, but one of the more interesting things is, today we're very big on intimacy. Everybody can do intimacy wherever they want and have all this sort of stuff. But I saw research that showed that the women who are most satisfied in the bedroom are who the world would consider the prudes. They're ones who are married to somebody who goes to church, is faithful in going to church, is trying to live by those principles. And you would think, wait a minute, why would they be the most satisfied? They're not having all the fun and everything. Well, it's exactly what you said. It's because here's somebody she feels totally emotionally safe with, totally physically safe with, and feels totally able to totally release herself, which you don't have when you're out there playing the field and all the stuff we see in the movies and on Netflix.
Right. Well, tell us, how did you get into this ministry?
Well, my parents divorced when I was 13. And basically, I know there's a number of you listening that you didn't have good relationships with your dad. But I had a fantastic relationship with my dad. Loved him. He was my God. He was my hero. He was my Superman. He could do nothing wrong. And I did everything with him. When the divorce happened, I went from seeing him all the time, and he moved, years away. I went to seeing him maybe 4 or 5 times a year. And that was a huge loss for me. And my mom, she did her best to raise 2 girls and an angry teenage boy, which was me.
Right.
But basically, I dragged anger into my adulthood and didn't realize it. I was in denial. And I was at a marriage encounter weekend where we were trying to work on our marriage, which I didn't think was that bad, by the way. And I just sensed God say, Kent, if you don't get your act together, you're on the same emotional path as your dad. And at that point, my dad, who was an adult child of divorce, from an adult child of divorce, as I understand it, had already divorced twice, was heading towards his 3rd marriage. And that scared me to death because I loved my wife and I didn't want to divorce. But here now we're saying, hey, if you don't get your act together. So I'm basically a researcher by heart. And I did a lot of research, interviewed counselors and adults with divorced parents and read books and did tons of research. And I learned a couple of interesting things. A lot also from a book called The Unexpected Legacy of Divorce, which was the first book that I stumbled across.
Okay.
And I learned 2 big things. First of all, my parents' divorce, even though this was now 20 years later, my parents' divorce was still impacting me. The second thing I learned was that there were millions of me out there that had no idea that the parental divorce thing was really still impacting me. So at the time, I was serving on the deacon board of the church, and I said, hey, we need to let people know about this. And they're like, well, go ahead. So I did my first all-day seminar back in 2004, basically to share what I'd learned. And 10 years later, I'd started Adult Children Divorce Ministries then. 10 years later, it became a 501c3 nonprofit. A few years later, I got my master's in counseling, and here we are.
Wonderful. Going through being a child of a divorce is not wonderful. However, it is wonderful that you worked through the anger and work through the things that happen to you because of that, and you're probably a better person because of that.
Absolutely.
And you can have empathy for other people that went through the same thing. It's easy to have sympathy for somebody, but if you've never walked in their shoes, you can't have empathy for them. So
Right.
you can truly be empathetic towards somebody that's a byproduct of a broken relationship, or somebody that's actually in a broken relationship.
And there's common
that's-
issues that affect us. And that's the thing that I learned. And you've mentioned a couple times, anger is the number one issue that impacts adults with divorced parents. We have
Right.
we have unresolved anger. It might come from blame. We tend to blame people. We blame one or the other. Another thing that we see is the loyalty challenge. I call it the loyalty challenge. And basically that's, who do you love the most? Me, mom, or dad? I mean, you said, they asked you, who are you going to stay with? And that plays out as tension, and we get angry because we don't want to choose in most cases. We love everybody, and we don't want to have to choose one, and we become angry with that. Another big issue we deal with is fears. We have the fear of abandonment, the fear of conflict, the fear of inadequacy, the fear of marriage we've talked about, fear of divorce. And those fears, most of which is under the radar, we're not aware of that. But for instance, fear of conflict. For somebody from an intact family, conflict in a relationship is conflict. You have it, whatever. But if you have divorced parents, in our brains, conflict equals divorce.
Right.
So we avoid it like the plague. We don't want conflict because conflict equals divorce. Now, in reality, that's not true. When you put two people together, you're going to have conflict, and you work through it and you process through it. But what did we see? We saw conflict and then divorce. So in our brains, it's hardwired that you want to avoid that. Another thing that affected me personally, well, all these affected me personally, but this one was particularly interesting. It's called the fear of doom. And basically what that is that we're always waiting for the rug to get pulled out from under us. Many of us, even if the parents were fighting, even if they threatened divorce, we never really expected it to happen to us. We hear the numbers, 50% of all the marriages, but we never expected it to come washing up onto our shores. And we
Right.
get caught off guard. And what happens is we go through life expecting things to fail. And one of the things that really struck me in the research was that you're from an intact family, job's going good, kids are behaving, marriage is going well, everything is great. Your anxiety level goes down. If you have divorced parents, job's going good, kids are behaving, the marriage is going okay, life is good, your anxiety level goes up. Why would that be the case? And that's because you have more to lose. If it's all going to fall apart anyway, you get more stressed when things go good. So what happens is, one of the things that was taught in the Bible was that Jesus said he's come to bring life more abundantly. I call that 0 to 10 life. Some things are really great. Some things are really not great. But what we tend to do is live between 4 and 7. We don't get too low, because if we get too low, we're just going to lose it. And we don't get too high, because why go there? You're only going to be disappointed anyway. And that's a really sad way to go through life. And that's why I try and communicate these things. First, because they undermine marriages. Second, because we have this great life that we have, not perfect and bad things happen, but we have this, we can anticipate because life is good. Good things do happen. But when we're going through the thing, well, any minute it can all fall apart. We don't enjoy life like we could.
Right. That's true. One of the episodes that I did recently solo was on parent alienation.
Okay. Yeah.
And I was just thinking about that one day, because I really went through that. And my in-laws and my ex-wife, they did a real number on my son and did everything they could to teach him what a monster I was and how irresponsible I was, and that I was a bad father. And so I did an episode on that, because I think it's something that needs to be talked about, and it's something that happens all too frequently.
It does.
Especially in divorces.
Yeah, it does. When I'm in counseling, and if I'm counseling somebody who's going through a divorce, because in my counseling practice, I deal with all sorts of stuff. I mean, depression, family issues, divorce, whatever.
Sure.
And then in my ministry, I deal just with adults with divorced parents. But when I have somebody in front of me, usually just one of them, and they're going through a divorce, I am big on teaching that it is important to take the high road, because what happens is if we go for the jugular now and we're bad-mouthing the other parent and we're saying all these negative things about him and parent alienation and lighter versions of it, sooner or later when the kids grow up, they get it and the light bulb goes off and they see the
Right.
truth. And
Right.
and then you've lost them. So maybe you won a battle or two, but you lose the war. And that's why when I deal with clients that are going through a divorce, I am huge on take the high road. Never, and it's basic co-parenting. You never badmouth your spouse or your ex
Right.
in front of the
Right.
kids. Never, and you don't diss them. You don't whatever. And well, even if it's hard and they're doing it to you, well, what happens if I lose the kids? Just hang in there. Just toe the road. Because what will happen, and again, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I can't tell you how many times the light bulb goes off at 35, 28, or whatever, and they go, wait a minute, dad or mom never said anything negative about, the other parent. He never did. They were always there. They supported me. They never whatever. And the light bulb goes off and the situation flips. So it's so important. Yeah, parent alienation, it's on the spectrum. My mom, man, she was not a big fan of my dad.
Yeah, I'll bet.
So yeah, that was pretty interesting. But anybody that's, you addressed a lot of different people at the beginning of this, and anybody that's going through divorce, I can't recommend enough. Don't follow the co-parenting rules. Don't badmouth them. No matter what the other people are doing, don't do tit for tat. Don't do that, because the kids in most cases will get it down the road. When they become an adult or whatever, they're going to see the truth, and then you've got them for the long haul. Don't think about the battles. Go for the war.
Right. That's good. So how does denial influence adult children of divorced parents?
It keeps us from being whole, happy, having healthy relationships, because if you're like me, and I was denial for 20 years, particularly with anger, we're blaming everybody instead of looking at, whatever it is, which is us. One of the other issues we deal with is we don't trust anybody. Adults with divorced parents really make people trust, earn their trust. And if we're in denial, we don't acknowledge the fact that, some people you can't trust, but actually most people you can. And the other thing that happens with situations like trust is it is our tendency to poke people with a stick to see if we can trust them. And we poke them with a stick, poke them with a stick, poke them with a stick, poke them with a stick. And then they go, I'm tired of this. And they leave and we go, see, I knew we couldn't trust them. So when we're in denial, as I was for a lot of years, it robs us of the opportunity for the healing that is available when we understand that we have anger issues, when we understand that we're fearing of conflict, we're fear of abandonment, we're fear of rejection every minute. And for guys, the fear of inadequacy feeds anger. We hate feeling inadequate. We hate that. It feeds anger. And guess what? If we're angry at her, she responds in a way that, will be disrespectful, which makes us more insecure, which makes us more angry, and it just feeds itself. So denial, I encourage you, if you're listening to this right now and you're going, whoa, you know what? He's striking a little bit closer to home than I would like to admit. I really encourage you. You're at a fork right now. You can either go back and go into denial like I was, and then you hear a message that's like, hey, you're heading down the wrong path. Or you can go, you know what? Maybe there's something to this, because the holidays are a hassle and birthdays are a hassle and all that. But you know what? I'm angry all the time. I don't relax. I never relax. I'm a control freak, because I believe that if I could just control everything, then it won't fall apart, which is not true, because the harder we hold apart, the more things fall apart,
Right.
So I would encourage you to it's not a coincidence that you're hearing this program today. I believe in God incidences, that you were called to be here and hear this. And I just encourage you to take a look at what you're experiencing. If you're in a relationship right now, ask them. They'll tell you. Well, yeah, anger, fear, yeah, I just mentioned this and you went ballistic. You didn't even want to get married because you asked the people around you, and they'll probably tell you, yep, you're probably affected by some of this. So don't be in denial like I was, because you're robbing yourself of freedom and enjoyment. I was not. I mentioned earlier, we've been married for 41 years. I was not a great person for a lot of years. I had big time anger issues. And it wasn't all children of divorce, but that contributed a lot to it. And insecurity. I was highly insecure, had a lot of fears. And, if you have anger issues, and it's obviously not you, so I blame my wife. I blamed everybody, whatever. And it was a rough go. It's only by the grace of God that we made it through to these last few years. But I am so thankful that because I moved past my denial and really dived into this stuff and really started looking at how did my parents' divorce affect me, I was able to get the healing that I needed, and I can be the spouse that my wife, my incredible wife, deserves, and a better reflection of what a good marriage is to our kids.
Right. So one of the recurring themes or topics that we have in this podcast is emotional intelligence. And what does that mean? It means that we are able to do some introspection, and we're able to look at ourselves through a clear lens, or as clear a lens as possible, and understand what motivates us, what drives us, why do we act the way we act. Men are not real. We don't like to do that. We were taught, or at least I was taught, men pull themselves up by their bootstraps. They work hard. They provide for their family, but they're not gonna get involved in any touchy-feely, warm, fuzzy conversations about how they're feeling about that day or about that situation, right?
Nope.
And so men have to, especially if they have anger issues for whatever reason, they really need to identify that they have the problem, number one, and number two, hopefully they're with a partner, spouse, whatever, that a significant other that can prod them, encourage them to figure out what's going on with that. Because anger issues absolutely are uncomfortable to deal with. The person that's angry is not happy, and the person that is affected by that anger is not happy. And if you got kids involved, and they're not happy either, right?
It crushes hearts.
Right.
It just is.
Denial is kind of a self-perpetuating disaster, right?
Yeah, it is. And it's not an emotional, it is not, when I talk with guys, because you're exactly right, we do not like, talking about emotional issues or anything. But the reality of it is we are emotional. We are fearful. Sure. No one can make us feel more inadequate. And it's not malice or intent. It's just how they're wired. Nobody can make us feel more inadequate or inferior than our loved one, our wife, because they're a different gender. They think things differently. They are relational. Sure. We are more logistical. And we don't know a lot of this stuff. I've been dealing with, some couples that they're having kids, and the wives expect the husband to be able to be nurturing and be this and be that. Well, guess what? He didn't babysit. He didn't do all this sort of stuff. He's expecting this kid to come out. We're going to throw a baseball, and it doesn't work that way. So the reality of it is that emotionally, we shun from that thing, but we are very emotional. We are fearful that we're not going to be able to, do what we need to do. We are feeling, particularly if there's, and again, it's kind of interesting in the context of adults with divorced parents, this becomes even more exacerbated. Because we often didn't get trained. Now, in our generation, we didn't have 50-50 custody. In most cases, it went to the mom. And as a result, and again, my mom did the best she could with a teen. I was 13 when our parents got divorced. So you're just heading into puberty and all this sort of stuff. And I didn't learn. She did her best to teach, but I didn't learn basically what it is to be a man. And we're not going to have time to deal with father hunger today. But the reality of it is we have a lot of men out there who don't have a clear image of what it is to be a healthy male. We're not seeing that. And it's not some plot from the women and all that. They're women. So if they're raising us, they're going to raise us through that lens. But the reality of it is we need that model. What is it to be a man? What does it look like to be a man? And we're kind of feeling our way along. So we are more susceptible to feeling inadequate or feeling inferior. And that breeds anger, which only reinforces the process.
Right. So I was going to ask you about the father hunger, because I've never heard of that.
Okay. Basically, father hunger is when the father leaves, it creates a gap. For women, it's particularly problematic. Anger affects men and women, but it comes out in more negative behaviors with men. With father hunger, it affects men and women, but it comes out in more negative behaviors with women. The research shows that women, when the parents divorce, they receive it egocentrically, they call it. Basically, the dad didn't leave the mom, the dad left them. If they had been prettier, if they had been smarter, if they'd done whatever, then dad wouldn't have left. Now, we know that's not true. But when we're dealing with young girls, that's how they're filtering it. And what happens is women are looking for an answer to two questions. Am I beautiful? And am I special? And I'm not talking about supermodel beauty or anything like that, just beautiful in the eyes of our Father. And if they don't get that answer in a constructive, healthy way from a dad or a strong, safe relative, they're going to get that answer. And too often they get it from guys who are going to say, oh, yeah, you're special. You're beautiful. If you do this, if you do that. And it just perpetuates the woundedness. Now, for guys, the question is, do I have what it takes to be a guy? Do I have what it takes to be a man? My generation was John Wayne and now today it's The Rock or whoever's out there today. But, a lot of these images are distorted and we don't have that image of, do I have what it takes to be a man? And father hunger, when the father is gone, even if like today, a lot of it's 50-50 joint custody, but that means 50% of the time, there's the expression that, we both have kids, that more is caught than taught. Well, even with 50% of the time, that's 50% less time to catch things. And when we are with them, it tends to not be natural. It tends to not be normal because we're dealing with custody and this sort of stuff. And you have the Disneyland parents and all this sort of craziness. So we lose. Father hunger robs us of that model that we need to be the male that we need or the female that we need to be. It's kind of interesting. It actually, both of those land on the father's side because the females get their femininity, their confirmation of their femininity from the dad, and the guys get their confirmation of masculinity from their dad. So when he's gone, we end up with this father hunger vacuum that unfortunately the wrong people can try to fill.
That's interesting. Thank you for explaining that.
Yeah. It also distorts our view of God. We've talked about faith issues a little bit. Elizabeth Marquardt, in her book Between Two Worlds, talked about how we hear the scriptures when our parents divorce. Honor your father and your mother. Well, we might sit in the pew and look to our left, and that might be good for you, and that might be good for you, but honor my father? Honor my mother? Are you kidding me? And we start to look at exceptions. She had a really interesting survey on the prodigal son, where basically the story is the son says, I'm going to get my inheritance. And he goes off and he wastes all his money on, women, wine, women, and song. And eventually the father watches for him and he comes back. Well, she found in her research that with adults with divorced parents, it's when they hear that story, it's the parent that left. And they're waiting for the parent to come back. And I've dealt with people in workshops and seminars that their parents divorced 40 years ago, and there is still that little voice that says, if they would just get their act together, if they would just do this, they could get remarried again and we could be a family again. Now, rationally, we know they're remarried, they've got a life and whatever, but I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, yeah, I still think if he could just stop doing this, if they could get back together again, it never really goes away. And that's something that, again, it can distort when we say, he's a good God. Well, is that really true with what I experienced? And the reality of it is, yeah, it's true, because as he gives us a choice, God doesn't say, you're going to do this. He gives us the choice. Our parents also made choices, and one or both of them chose to do things that have had a negative impact on us for, a long time.
Right. Good stuff.
So one of the things that's important is, and you talked about denial, is we want to make sure that we learn what's going on. There are resources out there. Our website's hopeforadp.com and for the number 4, adp.com. And basically learn what's going on. If your heart's kind of going, maybe this is me, or maybe you're a spouse of somebody and going, that's him or that's her, get resources. Find out what's going on. The second thing I would recommend is talk to somebody. It is amazing how many people never talk to anybody about the divorce. Now, I was doing a workshop one time at a college, and Friday night I think the sister came up to me afterward and said, you know what? I've never talked to my brother about this, about the parents' divorce. The next day I had the brother, and he came up and said, you know what? Last night was the first time my sister and I ever talked about the divorce. We just don't talk about it. There's dirty laundry, there's whatever. I would encourage you to talk to your spouse, your significant other, your partner, and just start sharing about this. The other thing, you can get some good resources. There's some really good resources out there. If your parents waited until you were an adult to divorce, that's called gray divorce. Creates this whole other issues. There's a good book called Home Will Never Be the Same Again. It's by Friedenberg and Hughes, and it deals with gray divorce. What do you do if you get a call at work, I'm leaving your dad or I'm leaving your mom, and they've been married for 37 years? What do you do? What's going to happen? Really great book. I also wrote a book called Choose a Better Path, Overcoming the Impact of Your Parents' Divorce. It's the only book of its type, really. It's kind of a devotional where you kind of wander through the various issues that impact adults with divorced parents, but in a very user-friendly a very user-friendly format. So it opens the door to, am I dealing with anger issues? Am I dealing with fears? Do I have unforgiveness in my heart? Am I grieving? Do I have father hunger issues? And it kind of just scratches the surface on, hey, maybe this is going on, but we definitely want to do something. Don't go from this thing and go, well, that was interesting, but I'll be okay until the next birthday or the next holiday, and then I'll just suck it up and can't wait for Christmas to be over with, and we'll move on to the next year. No, what I encourage you to do is let's look at some of these resources. Let's talk to somebody. Talk to your spouse, partner, a significant other. Well, what was it like when that happened, when your parents divorced? And talk about it. And guys, talk about it. Ladies, he's not going to talk about it and use as many words as you will. So just give him some slack. Let him talk a little bit. But I encourage you to talk about it. And then if you're dealing with significant anger issues or there was some trauma, father hunger can lead women to places they shouldn't be or have things that happen to them that shouldn't have happened. Abuse, sexual abuse, whatever. See a professional counselor. See a professional Bible counselor. Get some help. Don't try and do this by yourself, but do something. Don't go into denial because it's not going to go away and things can be a lot better. And most of all, do it for your kids. Do it for your spouse. Do it for yourself because it doesn't have to be this way.
It's interesting that you brought up gray divorce because I think it's more prevalent in the 21st century.
Absolutely.
Where parents raise children, get them through high school, get them into college. They're empty nesters, and they find themselves looking in the mirror or looking at each other, going, "Well, who are you?" Because our identity as parents is so tightly wrapped around who our children are and what's happening in their lives, and then when they leave, then all of a sudden we're back face to face with one another, and because our identity is wrapped in the children. We're so tightly woven with who the children are and how they're doing and how they got there that we've lost connectivity with one another, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, elderly parents wind up going, well, we'll just be roommates. Or they decide, hey, this is the end of the road and we're just going to go do our thing now. We'll be who we want to be. And
that's double digits now.
Yeah.
I've talked with people 38 years, 42 years, 47 years, and they're finding out that their parents are getting a divorce. And real briefly, that opens up another kind of can of worms. Some of the major issues that affect, if your parents divorced after you were an adult, some of the issues that you deal with is, one of the big ones is there's no support. Because one of the things you'll hear is, well, they're happy. Shouldn't they spend the last 30 years and be happy? And you're an adult. What's the big deal? You don't live there anymore. Well, the big deal is now you're explaining to your kids why grandpa and grandma aren't together anymore, and your Christmases are all different, and your things are all different, and you're not getting any support from anybody. Another issue is TMI, where basically when you're a child and your parents divorce, good parents will tend to protect you. They don't get into all the gruesome details of all the stuff. When you're an adult, you should understand why your dad is such a bum or why your mom is such a bum. You should understand that, and you should be on my side in this sort of thing. Or they will tell you stuff. I don't want to know that you're unhappy in the bedroom or whatever. I don't want to hear that sort of stuff. But they'll treat you more as a friend than as a child. You also have the loyalty challenge, which is huge. Doubt is one of the things that really, really bothers me about gray divorce, because there's kind of an adage that, if mom can put up with that or dad can put up with that all these years, then, we'll make it okay too. But after 40 years, when their marriage falls apart, it kind of comes in, that little voice comes in, it goes, wow, if they couldn't make it after all these years, how on earth are we going to make it?
Right.
And then the doubt comes in, and then all the stuff you talked about with social media and all that kicks in where, if you're not happy, just move on. Will kick in. So gray divorce, which is double digits now, you're seeing, the silver single commercials and all that sort of stuff now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It is rampant out there, unfortunately, and there's even less help. Whereas, you had mentioned earlier when our parents divorced, there was really nothing out there to help, going through divorce or dealing with parents. Now there's a lot of resources out there. if you're going through a divorce or if you're a child of divorce. For gray divorce, there's very little out there because it's not a big deal, according to the world. And yet, your world has basically fallen apart, and now you're looking backwards. Was any of it real? Or worse, the parents will say, well, we only stayed together because of you. Now their misery is your fault. So gray divorce is really problematic.
Amen. Well, Ken, I appreciate you being on our podcast episode today and for talking with us and sharing all this very helpful information.
It's been my pleasure.
Yeah. And so to my listening audience, I want to say thank you for the pleasure of your privilege of your time. And you can hear this podcast on Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Public Radio, and on Activate FM. You can watch the video episode on Rumble. It's RUMBLE. It's the conservative version of YouTube. Our website is located at parentingadultchildren.org. Parentingchildren.adultchildren.org. On the website, you can find my contact information. You can send me a voicemail, send me an email. You'll see the upcoming show schedule in the blog area. And there's a review button at the very top or a tab that says review. Click on that and you can leave us a review on any episode that you listen to. If you're on Apple Podcasts and you listen to an episode and you like it, right there on your smartphone or your tablet, you can click on leave a review and you can give however many stars and you can tell us how it resonated with you. I'd really appreciate y'all doing that because this podcast is for you, right? I release a new episode every Friday morning at 8 a.m. And thank you again for being here. I hope you get something out of this podcast episode. And Kent, thank you again for being here.
It's been my pleasure.
And having said that, I want to say bye-bye.
Please tune in next week for another episode of our podcast on parenting adult children.
If you are the parent, mentor, friend, or relative of a young adult in recovery, please listen closely for about 90 seconds. I have some very important information for you. The current treatment system has become a revolving door, relapse-ridden mess with well under a 20% success rate. It doesn't matter who's measuring it. My name is Richard Jones, and I have spent the better part of my 38-year career working with the families of young adults in recovery. Now, I am talking about young adults, 17 to 25, with substance abuse issues or trouble with the law. They may need rehab, they may be currently in treatment, or they may be finishing a detox program. They may be heading toward jail or being released soon. Most recovery programs are forced and sterile. They ignore your child's natural strengths and abilities and their biggest advantage, you. Now, the three biggest problems we can solve for your family right now. First, by accident or design, the system is built on a relapse model. It offers a Band-Aid that is designed to keep you coming back instead of killing the source of the relapse at its roots. Secondly, it's built on a model of guilt and shame in order to assign blame to you and your child instead of fixing the real problem. See, the system is financially abusive. Tens of thousands of dollars that will not guarantee one result, just a promise that you can try over and over again if you live long enough. Now, it's very important for you to understand, with the right kind of determined outcome support and a clear roadmap, you can get a relapse-proof recovery without humiliation, without guilt, or being financially abused. You can also start seeing results immediately. No more blind faith reliance on an indifferent, reluctant, or burnout practitioner. You can finally take advantage of a method that works with your young adult strengths and abilities. Let us show you the only lasting way to recovery instead of the same old failed methods that most treatment systems use without regard to result or to your family's future. If you are the type of family who will not take no for an answer, the kind of family who can't afford to lose someone they lose, please consider this: stopping the frustration and fighting right away. Exchanging embarrassment for pride and bragging, and saying no to being financially victimized with no promises whatsoever. If this sounds like the kind of recovery effort you and your young adult deserve, give us your name and best email address below for more information. You can also go to secondstarts.com, that's the number 2, NDSTARTS.com, and book a free 15-minute call. There is a better way for the people who care more.